It began as a typical weekend adventure for the group of urban explorers. Jenna, the de facto leader, had heard rumors of an abandoned structure deep in the forest, a place untouched by the modern world. Alongside her were her boyfriend Mark, their childhood friend Alex, and newcomers Danny and Trevor, eager thrill seekers looking for their next adrenaline rush. The trek through the woods was grueling. Thick trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the daylight. The group laughed and joked, their spirits high despite the uneven terrain and swarming insects. Jenna had a knack for finding hidden gems, forgotten bunkers, crumbling factories, and the occasional haunted house, and they trusted her instincts. After hours of hiking, they stumbled upon the staircase. It jutted out of the forest floor, its weathered stone steps descending into a gaping hole. Moss clung to the sides, and the air around it felt unnaturally cold, even in the midday sun. "What do you think it leads to?" Alex asked, peering into the darkness. Trevor tossed a rock down the staircase, but no sound of it hitting the bottom came back. "That's unsettling." Jenna was fascinated. "It could be an old mine shaft or a hidden bunker," she said. "We have to check it out." Danny hesitated. "This doesn't feel right. It's giving me serious bad vibes." But the allure of the unknown was too strong. With flashlights in hand, they began their descent. The staircase was steep and narrow, the steps slick with moisture. As they moved deeper, the air grew colder, and a faint metallic scent wafted up to meet them. The forest above disappeared, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. The laughter and banter faded, replaced by tense silence and the sound of their footsteps echoing endlessly. The group had been descending for what felt like hours. The walls around them, carved from ancient stone, bore strange symbols and markings. Jenna paused to examine one, a spiral surrounded by jagged lines. It seemed to pulse faintly under her flashlight, though she dismissed it as a trick of the light. "How far down do you think we've gone?" Mark asked, his voice strained. "Too far," Danny replied, her earlier unease now a palpable fear. "We should turn back." But when they tried to retrace their steps, they found the staircase had changed. The way up looked identical to the way down, the carvings and symbols repeating endlessly. Trevor sprinted up several flights, only to return to the same spot where they stood moments later, his face pale with panic. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "How can we be back here?" Jenna tried to stay calm, but even she felt the growing weight of dread. The group decided to keep descending, hoping to find an exit or a clue about the staircase's origin. As they moved, faint noises began to echo around them, whispers too soft to make out, the faint clink of metal, and distant footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in the group. The first relic appeared on the fifth flight, a rusted pocket watch, its hands frozen at midnight. Nearby, Danny found a notebook, its pages filled with frantic, indecipherable scrawls. "Someone's been here before us," she said, her voice trembling. But the thought wasn't comforting. If others had come before, why hadn't they made it out? As the hours dragged on, the group's unity began to crumble. Hunger and exhaustion set in, but there was no place to rest. The staircase offered no landings, no breaks in its relentless spiral. The whispers grew louder, interspersed with faint laughter and sobbing. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, but when they turned to look, nothing was there. Danny was the first to break. She froze mid-step, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "I saw her," she whispered. "Saw who?" Alex asked. "My sister. She was standing right there." Danny pointed to a dark corner of the staircase. Her sister had died years ago, and the mention of her name sent a chill through the group. "It's just the darkness playing tricks on you," Jenna said, though her voice lacked conviction. She'd seen something too, a shadowy figure with Mark's features, watching her from the edge of her flashlight beam. The staircase seemed to sense their fear, feeding off it. Trevor began muttering to himself, his words incoherent. Alex tried to keep the group moving, but his own resolve was waning. The carvings on the walls became more elaborate, depicting scenes of anguish and torment. One showed figures trapped in an endless spiral, their faces contorted in despair. Mark stopped suddenly, turning to Jenna. "Why did you bring us here?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "You knew this place wasn't right. What are you talking about?" Jenna shot back, her frustration boiling over. We all agreed to come. Their argument escalated, the tension between them snapping like a taut wire. Meanwhile, the whispers grew deafening, drowning out their voices. Dani screamed, covering her ears. "Make it stop," she cried. By the time the group reached what felt like the 100th flight, they were barely holding on. Trevor had vanished hours earlier, his flashlight abandoned on the steps. They called for him, but the staircase swallowed their voices. The relics became more frequent: a shattered lantern, a child's shoe, a cracked mirror. Each item felt like a piece of someone's life left behind, a reminder of how many had been lost to the staircase. Jenna picked up the mirror and froze. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't her face. It was older, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, a version of herself consumed by the staircase. "We have to keep moving," Alex said, though his voice was barely audible over the whispers. He looked weaker than before, his movements sluggish. The staircase was draining them, sapping their strength and willpower. Then came the worst manifestation yet. The staircase began to twist and warp, the steps bending like liquid. Familiar faces appeared in the stone walls. Loved ones, enemies, people they had lost. The faces spoke, their voices filled with accusation and sorrow. "You left me," Dani's sister said, her voice echoing in the darkness. "You'll never be free," whispered the shadowy version of Jenna. The group's fears took tangible form. Mark was attacked by a monstrous creature resembling his father, its twisted limbs reaching for him. Dani disappeared into the shadows, her screams fading into the void. Alex tried to fight off a swarm of black tendrils, but they dragged him down the steps, his flashlight tumbling into the abyss. Jenna and Mark were the only ones left. They descended in silence, their flashlights barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. The staircase seemed to stretch infinitely, but Jenna felt they were nearing the end. The air grew heavier, the whispers replaced by a deep, resonant hum. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber. The walls glowed faintly with an eerie, pulsating light. In the center stood a massive stone altar, covered in the same symbols they had seen on the staircase. Around it lay piles of bones and relics, the remnants of those who had come before. The altar seemed alive, its surface rippling like liquid. A voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant, speaking directly into their minds. "You have reached the end. Submit, and you will be free." Mark, his face pale and eyes hollow, stepped forward as if in a trance. Jenna grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Don't listen to it. We have to fight this." Mark hesitated, his expression torn. But the voice grew stronger, its tone commanding. "You cannot resist." Jenna searched the chamber, her eyes landing on an ancient dagger lying among the bones. She picked it up, its handle warm to the touch. The voice faltered as she approached the altar, the hum turning into a low growl. "You dare defy me," it roared. With all her strength, Jenna plunged the dagger into the altar. The chamber shook violently, cracks spreading across the walls. The light from the altar flickered and died, and the hum was replaced by a deafening silence. The staircase collapsed, the steps crumbling into dust. Jenna and Mark found themselves back in the forest, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. They were battered, broken, but alive. As they stumbled back to civilization, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that the staircase wasn't truly gone. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, it waited for its next victims.